Welcome back to Legalese 123, where we are covering cases across America. Hello and welcome back to Legalese 123. We are in the thick of it. Closing arguments for Kouri Richins Day 15 are underway. We've already heard from the prosecution. We already heard from the defense stating that they wanted a mistrial. They're not getting one. And now here it is the defense's turn. How are they going to counteract what Mr. Bloodworth has already presented to the jury? Let's get into it. We're not going to waste any time. Now, as much as I would like to put Miss Lewis on 1.3 speed, she happens to be talking pretty fast today. So we're going to see how we can get through this.
I don't know. I'm sorry. There you go. Great. That should be fine. Brittany will let you know if it's not. We're ready for the jury code.
Bring the jury.
Katie, is there a slide deck that we're playing? Okay.
I hope there's a slide deck. Everybody likes a good demonstrative.
Of a house at the moment, right? Okay. You'll let me know when you want to publish, Ms. Lewis?
I think Katie just has it ready to go. Yeah.
Oh, okay. But it's not up yet. Okay.
Come on, get your technical difficulties out now before they come, because the prosecution was smooth, right? Is defense going to be clunky? Because if they're going to be clunky, jury out, right? Come on, defense, please have your stuff together.
All right, please have a seat.
You had the whole weekend to prepare.
Thank you for your patience. We'll continue with closing argument. Ms. Lewis.
Oh boy, here we go. They're going to come out swinging. Let's go. Get your bat ready.
In the early, in the early morning hours of March 4th, 2022.
Barely hear her.
Quiet. Kouri Richins fell asleep in her young son's room, like many parents do. At some point in the night, she gets up and walks back down the hallway to her bedroom. She slips back into bed beside her husband. She settles in next to him. She reaches over, and he feels cold. Eric Richins, the father of her children, the man that she has built a life with. Something feels wrong. She pulls the blanket up around him, but something still isn't right. He feels heavy. She turns on the light. And when she looks at her husband, really looks at him, she realizes something is terribly wrong. And in that instant, in that bedroom, in the quiet early of the morning, Kouri Richins' world collapsed. Reasonable doubt. It's not just a slogan. It's not just a suggestion. It's a constitutional shield that protects the innocent and prevents the state from punishing without truth. And it is the state that has that high burden, the highest burden under the law, to prove each and every single element of each and every charged offense beyond a reasonable doubt. The state stood up on day one and they told you they were going to prove that Kouri Richins had the means, the motive, and the opportunity to kill Eric Richins. And we're going to talk about each of these, but first, I want to talk a little more about reasonable doubt. I've told juries for a long time that one way to understand reasonable doubt is, are there other reasonable explanations as to what happened? As you look at the evidence, if there are other reasonable explanations, this is reasonable doubt. And you have to find Kouri not guilty. I put to you that every fact that the state has put forth to say that Ms. Richins is guilty has another reasonable explanation. Let's go back to March 3rd, 2022. From everything we've heard during this trial, Kouri and Eric were happy that night. They were celebrating. Kouri was just about to close on the Midway Mansion. Rightly or wrongly, she believed that this was going to be the deal that put her over the top. The deal that had made everything she'd done with her business, the good, the bad, and the ugly, all worth it. The night of March 3rd, they have a celebratory drink, they go to bed, and then Kouri hears one of her sons cry out. And like parents all over the world do, she goes in to lie down on the floor of her son's room. An alibi or the truth? She wasn't inconsistent when she told this story. She told everyone, I was lying in Ash's room, I was lying down with him. What does reason tell you? What does experience tell you? When she wakes up, she goes back to her room. Eric appears to be asleep. We don't know for sure what happens over the next 15 minutes or so. The state asks you to leap to conclusions about what she was doing during that time. Yet they have not shown you any evidence of this. They just tell you to believe it. Well, what does reason tell you? She gets up. She goes to the bathroom. She picks up her phone. We all pick up our phone all the time. She's been away from it for an hour or two. She goes to the bathroom. Maybe she walks to the kitchen. Maybe she gets a drink of water. Maybe she lets out the dog. And then she goes back to her bedroom, phone probably in hand, gets into the bed next to her husband, again, realizes he's cold, pulls up the blanket, realizes something's wrong, and turns on the light. It probably takes a moment or two for her brain to register what she's seen. And then she makes that call that nobody ever wants to make. She calls 911. A big part of this state's case is that Ms. Richins is not grieving properly. You heard this from a couple of different witnesses, 2 or 3. What does that mean? I was unexpectedly widowed when I was not much older than Kouri, and I had 2 little boys. How do you judge someone in that moment? If I've learned one thing during this trial, I've learned I didn't grieve right. I didn't know that, but it's clear now that I didn't. They want you to look at a woman in the worst moment of her life and to judge her grief. There is no wrong way to grieve. They're asking you to judge how she is acting at that moment and then use that moment of evidence of guilt. In the opening, we pointed out, go ahead, put it on that the state looks at facts one way and sees a witch. But if you look at those facts another way, you see a widow. Here's an example. Hands over her face, curled up. A witch, hiding because she's done something wrong, or a widow, hiding and blocking out what has just happened to her, what has just happened to her children, which has just happened to her family and to her life. Look familiar? Portrayals of women grieving in art. Portrayals of women in grief. The state tells you during evidence that, oh, she didn't immediately talk to Kouri Richins when he came to the house because she felt so guilty she couldn't talk to him. Or was it because she didn't want to tell a father his son had died? Oh, she didn't tell the boys when she should have. It was weird. She didn't go talk to them. They were in the playroom. Again, because she felt guilty or because she was dreading the most difficult conversation, the conversation nobody, no mother ever wants to have with her young sons. Their father is dead. The father that everyone agrees was a wonderful father is gone, and she has to tell those little boys, you're never going to see him again. Believe me, that conversation may be the worst moment in a mother's life. How
Grieving widow or witch? Which is which? Shoot, keys.
a witch? Celebrating Eric's death. You heard Allie stalking. They were celebrating Eric's life. They kept it light for the boys. They were dancing, they were smiling. All of them were, even Eric's sister. Can we not smile in our grief? They want to tell you no. But reason and experience tells you differently. Let's talk about the investigation. The investigation in this matter was nothing but sloppy. It was driven by bias. Did you notice during the state's closing, they didn't really even talk about the investigation? Instead, they speculated. What was in people's heads? What were they thinking? Speculation, conjecture, not proof. Instead of looking at the evidence to determine what happened, the state they determined what happened, and then they found the evidence to support it. This is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when you favor evidence that supports a belief and ignore evidence that contradicts it. That is how this entire case was investigated, working backwards from a conclusion. It started on March 4th. Detective Woody, before she's even entered the home, Amy Richins tells her they think Kouri is somehow involved. Then both Katie and Amy Richins tell Detective Woody they think this is because she recently found out about a trust Eric created. Immediately, this influenced this investigation. But what happened that first day? They found nothing to support foul play. Kouri tells them he was a user of THC gummies, that maybe he used one that night. They never ask where the gummies are. They do a cursory search of the bedroom and bathroom. They admit that they don't look in places where the gummies were found a month later, high up in the bathroom, high above the refrigerator, high up in the laundry room, somewhere in a pocket of either Kouri or Eric's jacket in a closet. All places where they would have been put out of reach of children. But they didn't find any of them that day. You know what else they didn't do? They didn't secure the scene. They moved things around. They told you they didn't have probable cause to search the whole house. We couldn't search the whole house. All we could do was look in the bedroom and the bathroom. But they could have asked for consent. Kouri gave them consent when they asked to search one place outside of the bedroom. The entire house could have been searched that day, but they didn't do it. They didn't even ask. What else happens that morning? Officer Nguyen, he does his death checklist. He says, did he have any history of prescription abuse? Did he have any history of illicit drug use? And what does Kouri tell him? No. How easy would it have been to just say yes? If she had just killed him with illicit drugs, why in the name of God did she just not say yes? Had she said yes, we probably wouldn't all be sitting here today. She didn't say yes because she did not know how he had died. Over the last 4 years, they've gone back to that house 10 more times, and they still can't tell you what happened the early morning of March 4th, 2022. 10 warrants, that's a lot. That's not typical.
That is very, 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 very true.
They were still searching for evidence on February 9th of this year, 2 weeks before trial. 4 years of investigation, and they are still trying to find evidence to make their case because they know they don't have enough. They're still trying to prove Kouri Richins guilty. So let's talk about Todd Gabler. In comes Todd Gabler, the private investigator. Jeff O'Driscoll told you, well, he was an investigator for the estate, just the civil case. Seriously? He's putting trackers on the car of Kouri, her mother, her brother. He's trying to track Carmen Lauber's car. He's providing evidence to the police. Detective Woody testified that this information from the private investigator is what helped advance their investigation. He testified he was in the house alone numerous times, finding things the police didn't, not using gloves, calling law enforcement when he found things. He said he didn't need a babysitter while he did all these things, which is different than what Clint Benson told you. He said nobody was ever in that house without me being there. That wasn't true. What he told you wasn't true. Todd Gabler was in and out of that house numerous times by himself. He also told you that he was completely fair and unbiased, testing 2 hypotheses. His hypotheses, suicide and homicide. He ignored any others, including accident. And how did he handle this unbiased testing of hypotheses? You heard Josh Grossman. He said the first time he talked to Todd Gabler said right out of the gate, Kouri killed Eric. Josh told you that tainted what he thought of next. How does it not taint an interview when your opening line is, oh, Kouri killed Eric, so now let's tell me what you have, what you know. Josh told you he started looking back at things differently than he had before because of that. Like I said, he tracked Kouri's car, he tracked her family's car, he tracked Carmen's Lauber car. He didn't track Cody Wright's car. He had more to gain from Eric's death than anyone. He didn't track anyone involved in the civil case regarding the trust. He only tracked people that he thought might lead to information for law enforcement. Did he follow up on Eric's trip to Mexico shortly before the death? No. Did he go to Mexico? Did he try and figure out where Eric had been in Sonora, Mexico? No. Nothing about that investigation was unbiased. Nothing. He passed it all on to law enforcement. And then what he did is he said to law enforcement, you should talk to Carmen Lauber. She's on the ropes in drug court. This would be a really good time to interview her because she would be very likely to be compliant at this time. Everything about this investigation was led by the Richins family. They started on day one and they continued until trial. They are the ones who initially hired and paid for experts. Their private investigator gave information to the police. And by the way, Gabler testified that he followed all the rules of being a private investigator. And that may very well be true, but he doesn't have to operate under the Constitution. There's a reason that we have rights under the Constitution. There is a reason that law enforcement has to get warrants to enter your home, to take electronics, to search your house. It is to protect the citizens of our country. It is to protect the innocent. Sidestepping these important constitutional rights by hiring a private investigator who then let law enforcement know what to do taints this entire investigation. And you know what? That is terrifying. It's terrifying. If someone has enough money to hire a PI that can circumvent our constitutional rights, dig into every aspect of our rights, of our lives, and turn it over to police. We have a constitution for a reason. It's to protect us all. I want to talk about the lead investigator, Jeff O'Driscoll. Here's what he testified that his investigation consisted of. He got assigned to the case sometime in March of 2023. He got a search warrant for some medical records. He thinks he got a search warrant for a couple of cell phones. He interviewed Chelsea Barney, where they discovered that they were wrong about some text messages. Law enforcement was wrong with what they thought they were looking for. He interviewed someone named Jake Sorensen, who must not have had anything important to say because we never heard from him. Then he interviews Carmen Lauber, because he was told to by the private investigator. That's it. That was the investigation. He didn't investigate any other leads. He didn't attempt to corroborate information, particularly in the letter that we saw that Kouri wrote to her mother, the walk the dog letter. Now, he told you he didn't need to corroborate that because he didn't get that letter till after Kouri was arrested. So, I guess the state was done. You wouldn't want to start looking for things that might show her innocent. You've arrested her. Interestingly, they were still executing search warrants. They were still trying to find evidence for guilt, but they weren't looking at any evidence that might show innocence. It is absolutely possible that everything she said in that letter was true. In fact, at least 3 things in that letter were corroborated by the state's own witnesses. But they didn't investigate it. Again, ignore what might contradict your theory. Confirmation bias, reasonable doubt. Also remember that letter never went to anyone. So it was nothing more than thoughts on paper. That's all that letter was. What else didn't he do? He didn't interview the person Eric was talking to in Mexico the night of his death, and we'll come back to that. But he didn't follow up on that. He said that. He didn't follow up on where Eric went in Mexico or who he was communicating with in Mexico when he was there. He didn't investigate what Eric did or where he went on February 14th, 2022. He didn't follow up to see did Eric go to the hospital that day. In fact, he did nothing regarding that day. Nothing. What else? He didn't find fentanyl anywhere. Allegedly, there were 90 to 120 pills of something. At least oxycodone. Where were they? I guess somebody took them, but they didn't have them. So whatever pills Carmen may or may not have provided to Kouri were gone. They no longer existed. They couldn't find or test those pills. And we do know that she bought oxycodone. But you know what? There was no oxy oxycodone in Eric's stomach that night. So instead, Detective O'Driscoll says, well, we wanted to corroborate Carmen's story. I mean, we were going to corroborate it. We weren't just going to go by it. The story that they fed her, they want to corroborate the truth. They wanted to corroborate a story. Again, let's find what confirms our theory. Let's ignore what doesn't. Confirmation bias. Reasonable doubt. Sitting here in this courtroom after 4 years of investigation, there was an awful lot that O'Driscoll just could not tell you. Things he couldn't remember. He couldn't remember what people had told him in interviews. For example, he was asked, did you interview Eric's allergy doctor? Well, yes, but I can't remember what he said. Well, that might have been important because he testified the EpiPens in the house belonged to the children. Well, maybe because Eric had recently used his a couple of weeks earlier when he had an allergic reaction. He said, well, if I could have a few minutes, I could find out what was said. I could give you more information. We were in trial. He was on the stand 4 years after Eric had died. 3 years after he'd been appointed as lead investigator. And either he wasn't prepared to testify or he just didn't know. He is the lead investigator. Now the state elicited testimony from him that how could he possibly know the entire case? It's just too much. I couldn't know all that information.
He had to
And
know
he's the
that
one
they
that
were going to attack him.
He's the one they relied on to testify
This
about
is Sky
investigation.
Lazaro,
You didn't hear from anyone else about the last
her
3 years of
prior
investigation.
attorney.
They chose him. You know what else he couldn't testify to? He couldn't testify how the fentanyl got into Eric's system. He said, well, he
Right.
ingested it. There was no evidence, none, that fentanyl was put in a drink. That was
Right.
argument. Argument is not evidence. And they waited until closing to tell you, oh, she put it in a drink without any evidence to back that up. Okay, she made him a drink that night, but that's it. She made him a drink. There's no evidence that fentanyl was in that drink. And the lead detective who couldn't tell you anything, he sat through this entire trial. He heard every witness testify. He had an opportunity to form his answers or reform his answers based on what he knew other people had said. And yet he still didn't know the evidence.
I kind of agree with that statement. He was asked
I
things
want to talk a
and
minute
he
about
didn't
deleted
know.
texts and the phone searches just quickly. Deleted texts. They said there were deleted texts off Kouri's phone, and that it looks like that probably was true. Why would you delete texts off your phone? Maybe because you were having an affair over the last 2 years. You might want to delete that off your phone before your whole husband's family finds out about it. Maybe because she was buying oxycodone. I mean, she asked Carmen for pain pills. Doesn't mean she killed her husband, but you probably want that off of your phone. The phone searches. So the evidence showed that Kouri found out on April 13th that Eric died of a fentanyl overdose. And that's the day they took her phone and she gets a new phone. These searches are all done on that new phone. Searches of how much fentanyl does it take to kill someone, or how much fentanyl is a lethal overdose? I don't remember exactly. Yeah, because she just found out her husband died of a lethal overdose of fentanyl. You might want to know what that means. And she texted other things. They said, oh, she texted about women's prisons. Of course she's worried. An innocent person would be worried. Anyone would be worried if they just found out that they are a suspect in a homicide investigation. She would have been scared to death. She was looking for information based on what she found out after Eric died. All right, what do we know about those last few hours before Eric's death? It's not a lot, but we do know some things from the autopsy and the toxicology reports. We know that he had fentanyl in both his blood and his stomach. We know he had quetiapine and alcohol only in his stomach and not his blood. So this means the quetiapine had to be taken after the fentanyl. Had they been taken together, they would have both been in his blood. We know there was no histamine response, no anaphylaxis. So he had not had an allergic reaction to anything in his body that night, including fentanyl. The state wants you to believe that the allergic reaction he had on February 14th was to fentanyl. If he had an allergic reaction on February 14th, he would have had one again 3 weeks later. Now, I know the toxicologist testified, well, you don't have an allergic reaction every time, and you can look at her testimony, but it was a little bit hard to understand, but I believe she was talking about, you might eat peanuts for a lot of times and then have an allergic reaction, and then it starts. Once you have an allergic reaction to something, it doesn't typically go away. We know he had norfentanyl in his body, and this is because his body had started to metabolize the fentanyl. The state's toxicologist told you that the fentanyl could have been left over from a previous use. That was a possibility. Another reasonable possibility. The fentanyl was there from a previous use. That was the evidence. That is reasonable doubt. What else do we know from the ME and the toxicologist? Well, we know that the fentanyl was not put in a drink. And how do we know this? There was only fentanyl in the blood and not alcohol. The state's toxicologist leaned toward the fact that maybe Eric didn't even drink alcohol, that the alcohol in his stomach was post-mortem decomposition. But the other scenario that she said that was possible was that Eric took the fentanyl, then took the quetiapine, had a small amount of alcohol. She testified that it would take 15 to 60 minutes for fentanyl to make its way into the blood. That alcohol takes 15 to 30 minutes to make its way into the blood. So if the alcohol and fentanyl were taken together, they both would have been there at the same time in the blood. But just the fact that one reasonable possibility is that the fentanyl was taken before the quetiapine and the alcohol gives you reasonable doubt that it was placed in a drink an hour earlier. Now the state's saying, well, maybe she put it in a non-alcoholic drink. So their celebratory drink maybe didn't have alcohol in it. There's no evidence of that, but they're throwing around a lot of theories. Why is that? Because they don't have one. They don't know what happened. Dr. Christensen and Dr. Ulmer testified that the manner of death could not be determined. This is really important. Dr. Christensen testified the ME's office didn't know enough about Eric's history to determine if it was an accident. They also didn't have enough information to determine it was a homicide. The ME had at least a reasonable doubt as to the cause of death. And the ME isn't held to the high standard that the state is. And there was no evidence that the autopsy couldn't have been amended at a later date if additional information was received. The ME testified, excuse me, the ME didn't tell you that they couldn't amend the autopsy. He just told you they didn't. What else did they do? Why didn't they do a hair follicle test? Dr. Christensen said, well, we don't do that unless we're asked to. Would you be asked to do that by law enforcement? Again, Summit County was only looking for evidence to confirm their theory, evidence to support that Kouri was behind Eric's death. They did not want to look for evidence that contradicted that theory. Had they done that test, we might have our answer. Confirmation bias. All right, let's start with the means. The state did not and cannot prove that Kouri ever purchased fentanyl. Carmen Lauber, interestingly, they barely mentioned Carmen Lauber in their closing. The only witness who can put fentanyl into Kouri's hand. Let's talk about her testimony. Admittedly, a lot of it was painful to watch. And in some ways, she's sympathetic. But she is looking at multiple long prison sentences. And her only way out, her only way was to testify at this trial. But what she could not do was put fentanyl in Kouri Richins' hands. She told you that she had no memory of what actually took place in 2022. During those interviews, she told detectives over and over again, my brain is fried. I've been using drugs since 6th grade. My memory is gone. So what she testified to you wasn't what she remembered. She admitted on the stand that what she testified to was what she had been shown, what she had been told. Detective O'Driscoll told you that Carmen Lauber could not remember the purchase of drugs after Eric had died. When asked by Ms. Nestor if at least one of the times that Carmen allegedly purchased drugs from Mr. Crozier and brought them to Kouri was after Eric's death, his response was, her testimony was not that. She didn't remember it that way. We found digital evidence that supported that. You know what? She did testify to that. She testified at length and in detail about something that even Detective O'Driscoll said she didn't remember. Carmen Lauber was not able to tell you that she bought fentanyl. She agreed on the stand that it was the detectives that first put the word fentanyl in her mouth, in her head. She was told by detectives in this case that she bought fentanyl. Eric died of fentanyl. You bought drugs. You bought fentanyl. She took that story and she ran with it because she had everything to lose. And Detectives O'Driscoll and Detective Maynard told her you are getting a big, giant get out of jail free card. And what do you have to do to get that big, giant get out of jail free card? Give them the details that will ensure Kouri gets convicted of murder. You heard that from O'Driscoll's own mouth. He tried to explain it away. But he went in and he told this woman, get out of jail free card, give us the details to ensure Kouri gets convicted of murder. She had to tell them that. She had to tell you that. She had to say she purchased fentanyl. The detectives walked into those interviews not to find out what happened, but to get Ms. Lauber to confirm what they already had decided happened. Again, confirmation bias. She told them at that first interview, I literally never dealt with fentanyl. And she had reason not to deal with fentanyl. She told you that. She had a daughter who had overdosed from fentanyl. She was afraid of fentanyl. She told them that Kouri asked for something for an investor's bad back. Maybe it was for Eric. But she told them that Kouri asked for an investor's bad back. And that later she asked for something stronger. She asked for the Michael Jackson drug. She told them Kouri never asked for fentanyl. She admitted that she got the word fentanyl from Detectives O'Driscoll and Maynard. She told them she couldn't remember. She asked them to lay it out for her, to put the pieces of the puzzle together, to write it down, and I'll sign it. They argued that was because, well, she didn't want to write it herself. That's why they wanted us to write it. Well, she could have written it right there at the table, I suppose. But you know what else? Remember? She also told the assistant United States attorney basically the same thing. Put it together for me. And the U.S. attorney or the assistant U.S. attorney said, oh, we don't do it that way. You have to tell us what you remember. They literally offered a big, giant get out of jail free card. In the state's last question to Detective O'Driscoll, they brought up the TV show, The House of Cards, but who held all of the cards in this case? Jeff O'Driscoll told you. Carmen Lauber held all of the cards. Their entire House of Cards is being held up by her. And now at trial 3 years later, she comes in here and says she bought oxycodone once and fentanyl 3 times. Well, she had her story down. She told it very nicely under it. But when pressed, she couldn't remember anything. Not from 2022, not from 2023. She couldn't remember on Friday what she testified to on Thursday. And you know, I didn't ask her about her mental health or her learning disability to be mean. I asked her because it explains why she was so easily convinced by law enforcement as to what she needed to do and what she needed to say. She described her learning disability as low education. Well, you can decide what that means for yourself, but one possibility is she has an intellectual disability. And if that is the case, she is more vulnerable to suggestibility than most people. Easy to manipulate. And they took advantage of this. We all saw it. They did too, but they had to find someone who would confirm their theory. But you know what? Through all of this, there were a handful of things that Carmen Lauber was consistent about. There were a few. Kouri asked for some pain medication. Kouri said that in the Walk the Dog letter. Then she told you, I brought oxycodone from Susan Kohler on February 11th. Prescription oxycodone. Now that's important because if Kouri had any pain pills before February 14th, these were likely what she had. She said Kouri never asked for fentanyl. She said that in all of her interviews. Carmen never asked Robert Crozier for fentanyl. She said that. She was consistent with that. That she bought pills from Robert Crozier. That the pills she got from him were light green, 15 to 20 milligram oxycodone pills. When she bought from him again, she asked for more of the same. Those are the things she said throughout. Everything she said, every other thing she said has changed multiple times. It changed again while she was on the stand. Now she says the number of purchases were more. That changed. The date changed. For the first time, she says that Crozier was the first one to say the word fentanyl. It's the first time we've heard that. Wasn't in the interviews. She's not a truthful person. There were a couple of little things she laid on the stand about. Not super important, but I'm going to point them out because they were just untruths. When I asked her if she was on any medication for her anxiety or any other illnesses, she said no. But then later, when Mr. Bloodworth asked her, she said yes, she was on medications. They were in her car in her purse. She told you Nancy Peterson drove to buy the drugs because she didn't have a driver's license. When we showed her that photo was reversed and that she was driving, did you notice how smoothly that story changed? Oh, well, yeah, I drove one way, she drove the other. By the way, where's Nancy Peterson? There was someone who might have been able to confirm Carmen's story, but we didn't hear from her. What else did Carmen lie about? She said on that stand and she told you, I never violated drug court after I got out, my get out of jail free card in May of 2023. But then when confronted, she had to admit, oh yeah, I did. That's right. She told you, well, I was holding a can of alcohol, but I didn't drink it. When confronted though, she had to admit that wasn't true. She sat on the stand and she told you that. Oh, I just held it. Oh, but you told your probation officer you drank it. Oh yeah, I guess I drank it. But what's the most important thing she admitted to lying to? She lied to a judge. She lied to a judge by writing a letter saying that she had been 100% compliant with drug court. And why did she lie to that judge? She wanted to go to Vegas. And she told you on the stand, she admitted it. Yeah, I was untruthful with the judge to get something that I wanted. She was untruthful because she wanted to go to Vegas. There is a lot more at stake here than going to Vegas. She is, again, being untruthful to get what she wants. And what she wants this time is to stay out of prison. And she will say whatever she needs to make that happen. You know what else she got by telling that story in addition to her get out of jail free card? She also got an advance straight to go and pass drug court on the way card. No more showing up at drug court. And she told you drug court's tough, but she didn't have to go anymore. No regular check-ins. She just had to text hi or lobber to Detective Maynard. And most importantly, no more drug tests. She's still on probation, still waiting to go to court to see if her charges will be dismissed. And she's not being drug tested. Is she telling you the truth about being clean? We have absolutely no way to know. She got everything she wanted by testifying to things that she admitted she had no memory of. Can you feel for Carmen Lauber? You can. Can you believe her beyond a reasonable doubt? You cannot. And if you can't believe her beyond a reasonable doubt, you have to find Kouri Richins not guilty. I don't want to talk about Robert Crozier because he's also an addict and he also changed his story. But what makes him different? First, his original story was given in a 13-minute interview while he was coming down from drugs, not in 10 hours of interviews over multiple days. Detectives came in and they told him he sold fentanyl. They said, we already know. We know you sold fentanyl. You just need to confirm it. We won't jam you up. Just tell us you sold fentanyl. And he agreed with them. And they asked, did Carmen Lauber know she got fentanyl? And he said, absolutely. But what did he explain to you on the stand? Now that he's been through rehab, now that we know he's sober, he gave people what they asked for when he was selling drugs. He always gave them what they asked for. So when detectives came in and said, well, you sold Carmen fentanyl, Carmen asked for fentanyl, he said, yes. He said, what I meant is if that's what she asked for, that's what I gave her. What else makes him different, though, from Carmen Lauber? He changed his story from what the prosecution wanted him to say to what they didn't want him to say, not the other way around. Why do this? Why would he risk his immunity? It would have been so much easier for him just to stick with his original story. Let's go back. So he gives that original story in April of 23. He sobers up. He meets with the state. He meets with Mr. Bloodworth in April of 25 before he ever spoke to me or to Mr. Berman. And he tells him at that time that he got it wrong. He says, no, I sold Carmen oxycodone, not fentanyl. And how does he know this? He told you. Because he didn't start selling fentanyl until late 2022. And he sold to Carmen Lauber in early 2022. Also, his source gave him fentanyl that was so dark it was almost purple. It wasn't light green. It wasn't light blue. Okay, so then he meets with our team in October of 25. He says the same thing. He signed an affidavit swearing it to be true. He testified to the same thing at trial. I was only selling oxy in 2022. And not only that, he told you it was prescription oxy from a pharmacy. So not fake oxy that was actually fentanyl, but real oxy. And he was a bit of an expert on the topic. I think he knew more than the drug expert did. He told you, light green pills, those were 15 to 20 milligram pills. Light blue pills, those were 30 milligram pills. His prescription was 10 milligram pills. He knew his stuff. He was a pretty successful drug dealer. And he told you when I sold fentanyl, those pills were almost purple. What did he have to gain by testifying to this? He's never met Kouri Richins. He'd never met Eric Richins. He didn't know Carmen. He isn't getting anything from anyone. It's for these reasons that his testimony is more credible than Carmen's. Her freedom is at stake, so she had to say fentanyl. She has to give them Kouri. He has nothing to gain. He just told you the truth. The state told you in closing that they traced the fentanyl. It's absolutely not true. Carmen never even looked at those pills. She didn't test those pills. She didn't take any of them, according to her. And we don't know where any of them are. Where are these some odd 90 to 120 pills? They didn't trace that fentanyl. We have no idea where that is. They didn't trace any fentanyl. So how did Eric end up ingesting fentanyl? What other reasonable explanation might there be? You know, I'm not going to stand here and say to you that Eric Richins was a drug addict. He wasn't a Carmen lover. He wasn't a Robert Crozier. I don't think the evidence shows that. But that doesn't mean he didn't use. That doesn't mean he didn't ask Kouri to get him pain pills. He probably did. So what do we know? We know Eric was in pain. He had Lyme disease, which can be very painful. He had back pain. He had knee pain. We know he'd been in Mexico not long before his death. Look at what he was doing right before his death. So right before his death, he's texting Pedro Sonora, back and forth, back and forth. Did they interview him? Like we said, no. He texts his friend Scott Wagner, more, Pedro Sonora. From 8:30, between 8:30 and 8:36, he texts him 1, 2, 3, well, these are back and forth. But between them, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 texts. He gets a call from Scott Wagner. What's his last Google search? How far is it from Scottsdale to Nogales? And then he gets a text from Raul. We also don't know anything about Raul. Maybe he made other calls. The state said maybe Kouri was calling on the Wi-Fi. Maybe so was he. We don't know who else he talked to, but this is what we do know. Oh, which this is a good place to bring up, I think, that the state did stand up here and they told you that we said things in opening that didn't come in during trial, and that's true. Strategies change during trial. But remember, we are not the ones under an obligation to put on any evidence. It's not us. We're not under an obligation to prove anything. It's them. Okay, so what else do we find on that first day that Eric died? What else do they find? The hydrocodone bottle. Whatever happened to that bottle? Why wasn't it tested? What was kept in that bottle? The bottle sitting right by the bed on Eric's nightstand, right next to his phone and watch that were placed neatly in his charger. An expired prescription bottle with nothing in it but residue. And you can see the residue there. Why would that be sitting out? A 6-year-old prescription bottle. What might be the best way to bring illegal pills back from Mexico? Put them in a prescription bottle? Put them in your suitcase? What might be the best way to store your illicit oxycodone? Stick them in a prescription bottle? Put them by your bed? And now that bottle's gone, and nobody knows where it is, and nobody tested it. And you saw that white powder, and you can look back when you go back, but you saw that white powdery residue on the nightstand next to Eric. Nobody tested that either. So what's another explanation? What could have happened? Eric was about to take his last pain pill out of that bottle that he kept by the side of his bed. He's on the phone with people in Mexico. He's checking how long it takes to drive from Scottsdale to Nogales. Maybe he knew he was getting fentanyl in Mexico. Maybe he thought it was something else, and he accidentally got fentanyl. Maybe had they tested that bottle, we would know, but they didn't. You know what else we know, though? We know he had a prescription for naltrexone, and it appears he wasn't taking it. A drug used to help people control craving for drugs and alcohol. It's not a drug used to treat Lyme disease. There's a reasonable alternative. Reasonable doubt. All right, I'm going to move to motive. The state absolutely did not prove that Kouri's relationship with Josh Grossman was a motive to kill her husband. Josh and Kouri had been seeing each other on and off for about 2 years. You heard from Josh. He testified that their future together was a fantasy. That at no time did Kouri ever lead him to believe that she was going to leave Eric for him. It was clear that Josh loved Kouri more than she loved him. You could see it in his face. You could see it in his demeanor. You can look at the text shortly before Eric died where Kouri was trying to break up with him. The state wants you to find that the conversation Kouri had with Josh about his time in Iraq is somehow evidence or proof of murder. But Josh told you she was grieving. That conversation was about life and death and Eric and bow hunting and the supernatural that it really didn't even seem that unusual at the time. He only thought it seemed unusual when the private investigator told him Kouri killed Eric. It's not evidence of a homicide. It isn't proof of anything. Yes, they were having an affair. Eric was also having an affair, possibly more than one. You heard there was a text about an open relationship, and they can laugh about that, but that's what the text said. And you know what? We do not bring this up to make Eric out to be a bad person. It doesn't matter what he was doing in his personal life. That's not the point. The point is that there were parts of Eric's life that he didn't share with people. Just like he didn't share with Cody that he used marijuana, or even that he took prescriptions. The point is we all have secrets, and Eric had secrets. But back to Josh, the best evidence that Josh was not a motive for Kouri to kill her husband is that after Eric died, she never did get together with Josh. She didn't show up at the brunch that they'd planned to celebrate the closing on the Midway Mansion. She didn't go on a vacation with him in April. She never even finished paying for that vacation. Josh told you that Kouri changed after Eric's death. She was grieving, that he saw less and less of her, and ultimately she broke things off. And by the way, if Kouri was as motivated by money as they would have you think, would she really have killed her wealthy husband to run off with the handyman who lived for free in one of her houses? That doesn't fit with the state's theory. The state says, look at texts, replace the words in them with different words. They stood here and made up what was inside people's heads, what they were thinking. The state has to rely on evidence. They have to prove their case, and they can't do that. The state did not prove that Kouri killed Eric in order to be with Josh. All right, money. Money's a motive for a lot of things for a lot of people. Was Kouri a brilliant businesswoman? No. Was her business struggling? Yes, it was. Was there fake it till you make it? There seemed to be a lot of that going on. Brooke Harrington testified that money was not a priority to Kouri Richins. She could have used an accountant, she said. She didn't even use QuickBooks. And this is all true. A young mother trying to run a business, like most young mothers, young working mothers, did her accounting take a backseat to her family? Probably. The state also wants you to believe that Kouri was cheating her best friend, but that's not what the evidence showed. The evidence showed that the $45,000 that Chelsea gave to Kouri was not earmarked for closing. Kouri could do whatever she wanted with that money. All that mattered was that when she went to that closing on that house, that she showed up with $45,000. It didn't have to be that $45,000. It could have been $45,000 she expected to come in from another flip. But then Kouri was arrested and never got the opportunity to do that. That's why that house foreclosed. But you know what the evidence has shown? That
I'm
Kouri
not buying that.
truly believed that that Midway Mansion was going to turn everything around. They were celebrating that night. If Kouri was going to kill Eric for money, she certainly would not have done it on the night that she believed she had just secured a multi-million-dollar property. And if you look at the state's exhibit 624D, you will see that Kouri actually made a profit on every single home that she flipped. She had reason to believe that she was going to make a profit on this one too. All the foreclosures, those were all after her arrest. And something else, they say it would have cost way more money than she had to rehab the mansion to live in it with Josh, which again, Josh said it was fantasy, that wasn't going to happen. But if you don't believe him, look at text, look at State's Exhibit 2-17D on page 33. This is where she and Eric are going back and forth on how much it would cost to rehab the mansion. And he says, we can't afford that. We don't even have time for that. What does she tell him? And you can look at it. I don't have it word for word. She tells him, no, we're not doing that. I just need money. I just need to give the numbers, to the investors. She didn't intend to rehab that. She intended to flip it after a little cleanup. All right, I want to talk about the gifts that the state talked about in their opening and throughout trial. They made such a fuss about these. They were accessed on Kouri's phone on March 4th, the morning of March 4th. They were tied to the celebration. That's what those were about. If you look at that exhibit, I think it's 3-40, you can see that the orphan gifts were accessed at the same time, down to the second, as a picture of the Midway Mansion. So what do we know about these gifts? We know that some photos were stored in a cache on the phone, not connected to any particular text. We know that they were accessed the morning of the 4th. We know that at least one of the pictures, the one of the mansion, was sent by Eric the evening before, which likely means all of these photos were sent prior to the morning of the 4th. These were not about Eric's death. She wasn't celebrating death. These gifts were sent earlier, and she was celebrating closing on that mansion. It just doesn't follow she would kill him for money. She received less from life insurance than she thought she was going to make on that mansion. Josh Grossman told you that she was surprised when she found out about the $1 million life insurance policy from auto insurance. It appears she didn't even know that. And if you take Brooke Carrington's testimony as true, and by the way, she was a good witness. She is a professional, expert witness. First hired by the family, and then paid $200,000 by the state. A prosecution witness sitting right here today behind the prosecution. Very different than the MEs, who were just here to tell you their findings. But anyway, if you accept her testimony, the life insurance wasn't going to fix the problem anyway. Kouri spent that life insurance within a matter of weeks and was still in debt. And you know what you heard on that phone call between Bryce and Chelsea and Kouri? All I want's the home. It's all I want. They can have everything else. They can have the money. I don't care. I just want my house where I've raised my boys. And you know what? Eric was making good money. In 2020, he told Christina Miller, the attorney he went to about talking about a divorce, that he was making, his income that year was over $33,000 a month. Cody Wright testified that they made $500,000 each the last year that Eric was alive. I believe there was testimony that there were other years she made even more. Not sure about that, but I think that was in there. So if this case was about money, Eric was worth so much more to Kouri alive than dead. Opportunity. Well, I guess her opportunity was she was the only one in the house. Who else was in the house, though? Who else had an opportunity to take those pills? Eric. 4 years later, 10,000 searches, over $300,000 worth of expert witnesses, 3 weeks of trial, the FBI, the DEA, Homeland Security, the Summit County Sheriff's Office. They cannot tell you how Eric ingested that fentanyl. They haven't done their job, and now they want you to make inferences based on paper-thin evidence. They speculated on a number of things during closing, and they want to tell you, they want you to do their job for them. Tell them no. Tell them if they're going to charge a person in your community with the most serious crime there is, they better have the facts. They better have the proof. They better have more than speculation and conjecture, because that's their job. It's not your job. I want to talk about the elements. The first one, aggravated murder. Okay, so they have to prove that Kouri Richins intentionally or knowingly caused the death of Eric Richins. The state has not proven this. They haven't even proven that she obtained fentanyl. They have not proven where the pills ended up or how Eric took them. The state stood up here and argued, well, it really doesn't matter what drug she purchased. As long as it was an illicit street drug, it absolutely matters. Because what did he die of? He died of fentanyl. There was no oxycodone in his system. There was no other drug in his system. They must prove that she purchased and gave him fentanyl. Oh, and let me talk about Becky Lloyd for 1 minute. She said that she had a conversation after a drink or two where Kouri allegedly said, things would be easier. I'd be better off if Eric was dead. But what else did you hear? You heard Becky in a recording tell officers and investigators, I don't think I can testify to that on the stand. I'm not sure that that's true. But then she testified to it. Maybe they threatened to bring a catch pole for her dog too. One thing I want to point out here, though, is if after looking at all the evidence, you believe that Ms. Richins accidentally obtained fentanyl when she thought she was getting oxycodone, and then Eric took those pills voluntarily and died, that is not intentionally and knowingly. That is not aggravated murder. And if you conclude that, you must find Kouri Richins not guilty. All right, attempted murder. What is the evidence of this? And again, it has to be intentionally or knowingly, and it has the rest of the elements there. She had to take a substantial step. So here's the evidence. Kouri bought an omelet and an egg sandwich at 9 o'clock the morning of February 14th. There was no evidence that she left that sandwich in the truck. To the contrary, there was a conversation with her mother saying, they think I left some sandwich in the truck. That didn't happen. Eric said he wasn't feeling well. He took a nap between 11:30 and 2. He called a couple of friends and sounded upset. He joked a few days later with Kouri and friends that his wife had tried to poison him, that he'd had an allergic reaction and used an EpiPen. Alex Staking told you that, Holly Staking. She never said that Kouri got defensive. She didn't say that. She said they were all laughing. She said that Eric didn't seem upset or scared. It was a joke. Wouldn't be the first time a spouse said something and said, "Oh my God, my wife tried to poison me." But that's it. That's their entire case. He didn't go to the hospital. He didn't do anything that day but take a nap, eating an egg sandwich, having an allergic reaction to something, and taking a nap. There is no world in which that is attempted murder beyond a reasonable doubt. Oh, they point out that months later in text to Chelsea, her friend, that she gets some details wrong about that day. Maybe because she didn't try to kill him, and in her memory that day really wasn't all that important. She said, "I bought him lunch." Well, it was breakfast. Again, they stood here and said, Eric was thinking this, Kouri was thinking this. She was, off with Josh thinking all these things. None of this was evidence, not any of it. None of it is proof. They talked about some IRS calls that she made on those days. No evidence as to what was in those calls. No witnesses from the IRS. Speculation, conjecture, not proof, reasonable doubt. Okay, I'm going to jump quickly. The other 3 counts I'm going to go through quickly, but I'm going to go to count 5, which is the forgery count. Now, remember what we're talking about here. This is one of those life insurance policies that any of us who belong to a credit union get, where you don't have to do anything. You sign here for $100,000 free life insurance. And this was filled out for both Kouri and Eric. Matthew Throckmorton, the handwriting expert, all he could tell you is that Eric probably did not sign the True Stage insurance policy. Probably is reasonable doubt. And he could not tell you that Kouri did sign it. They have not proven that Kouri forged Eric's signature. And there was no evidence either way if Kouri had permission to sign Eric's name on that True Stage life insurance. I mean, let's be serious. It's the rare married couple who doesn't occasionally say, "Hey, honey, I'm going to sign this for you. Is that okay?" There was no evidence either way. She's not guilty of forgery. All right, jumping to the insurance fraud counts, count 3. Count 3 is directly connected to count 5, because this count alleges that Kouri fraudulently obtained that insurance policy, and the fraud was forging Eric's signature. They said there was a reversed social security number on there, but the fraud's the signature. So if the state hasn't proven to you count 5, it automatically follows they haven't proven count 3, and you must find her guilty, not guilty on count 3. Count 4 alleges that Kouri fraudulently collected the True Stage insurance policy. All that means is if she did kill her husband and then represented something different to collect that insurance, that would be fraud. But if you find Kouri Richins not guilty on count 1, you have to find her not guilty on count 4. The state has not proven their case. They don't have the evidence that Kouri Richins killed her husband. So instead, they have tried to show you as much evidence as they possibly can to convince you that she's the sort of person who would. Getting close to the end. I'm sure you would like me to stop talking, but I have to tell you, I'm afraid to stop talking. Because as I stand here right now, Kouri Richins is still cloaked in a presumption of innocence. I don't ever want to walk back to that table. As a defense attorney, that is one of the longest walks a lawyer can make. This entire case is going to flash before my eyes. And all I will be able to think about once I sit down is, what did I miss? What did we miss? What didn't we tell you that you wanted to hear? Did I focus on what you wanted to know? Did we do enough? You're about to go through those doors and into the jury room and start deliberations. Everyone in this courtroom, everyone watching around the world, we all wish we could follow you and listen in. But that room, that jury room is yours. It's sacrosanct. In that room, you get to decide. And when you get in that room and you look at the evidence, if you think that Kouri Richins might have killed her husband, that she likely killed her husband, that she probably killed her husband, you must find her not guilty. Because maybe, probably, likely, very likely, none of these reach that extraordinary burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm going to ask you to do a couple of things when you go into that room. First, you might be tempted to go around the room and take a vote for guilty or not guilty to see where y'all stand. We ask you to refrain from this. Instead, we ask, talk to each other about where you see reasonable doubt. Also, if Kathy or Alex or myself did something to offend you during this trial, please hold that against us and not against Kouri. Now, the state's going to get up and talk to you again because they get the last word. And the reason they have that last word is because of that heavy burden. But when you filled out that jury questionnaire, we asked you if you would be comfortable making your voice heard in that jury room. Would you stand by your convictions, by what you believe? And each and every one of you said yes. So here's my final ask of you. When you're deliberating and something comes up that we didn't respond to, will you be courageous? Courageous enough to raise your hand and talk about what our response would be. Raise your hand for Kouri, because you are the last line between an innocent woman and the state. Be courageous. Courage is what this moment demands. The courage to stand between a member of your community and the state and demand that they comply with the Constitution, that they comply with their burden. Do not let them fool you. Do not fall for red herrings. Kouri Richins did not kill Eric Richins. The state did not prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt, and you have the courage to tell them this and find Kouri Richins not guilty.
Oh, wow. She made a lot of good points. I'm trying to get it to where we need it to be. She made a lot of good points, right? Again, everything is speculation and conjecture. This case is definitely a lot of circumstantial evidence based upon all of the text, all of the Google messages, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
When you're
And
deliberating,
so you have to ask yourself, did they prove beyond a reasonable doubt whether or not that Kouri Richins committed M, right? And that is the crux of the case, right? Did the defense do enough and talk enough about reasonable doubt? And if you have any doubt in your mind, you're supposed to convict her. Even if you think she might have done it, if you don't have proof that beyond a reasonable doubt that she did it, you can't convict her, right? So, wow, the jury is going to have an incredible task to decide this case. So we're going to go ahead and end here for the defense's thing. The rebuttal will come up in just a minute. We'll get to that in just a second. But please tell me in the comments, what do you think is going to happen? How do you think the defense did in their turn? Thanks for watching Legalese 123. If you like what you saw, please like and subscribe for more content.